Steve, the president's comments about what happened in Charlottesville were kind of addressed by, it seems, everybody. His daughter Ivanka, the Mooch, everybody except Steve Bannon and the president seem to be condemning the white supremacists.
Well, that's true. And the president's statement where he said twice that there was violence on many sides, the fact that he emphasized that phrase tells you that it was not a casual comment. He meant to say it. But what drew the deep condemnation by a lot of Republicans was the implication that there was somehow a moral equivalent here, that the white nationalists and Nazi sympathizers marching through Charlottesville were the same as the protesters who were objecting. You got Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, very conservative. We should call evil by its name. Senator Gardner of Colorado. This is a time to lay blame, and that's exactly what the president did not do. And you can discount the Democratic comments because they're politics, but this is part of a growing willingness and on the part of a lot of Republicans, including a lot of Trump supporters, to defy him and criticize him. And that's one of the most significant takeaways from the weekend.
Well, this was an easy one, though. I mean, you didn't have to go out on a limb to defy the president in this comment. As I said earlier, this was a layup. This was easy, an open net goal, and the president blew it.
I think he did, frankly, because, look, the presidency, one of the key roles that the president plays is moral leader. When Ronald Reagan, after the Challenger disaster, spoke to the country, he hit all of the right notes of sympathy and grief. When President Bush, 43, went to ground zero after 9/11, he did the same thing. When Barack Obama went to Newtown after the horrible shootings there, he knit the nation together and expressed their grief and expressed their outrage. President Trump failed that test. He failed to rise to the occasion as a moral leader. But also, one of the things that has to be said, while it's certainly be very unfair to say that all Trump supporters are racist, it's true, undeniably true, that throughout his career, Donald Trump has at times appealed to racist impulses and instincts. This is a guy who rose to prominence through the birther movement. This is a guy who called Mexican immigrants rapists. This is a guy who called for a total ban on Muslims coming into this country. So this statement over the weekend was not in isolation. It was in the context of a long history of Trump at times appealing to these racist instincts and impulses that are very much part of the American character.
And sadly, a lot of those same people and groups jumped on the president's non-statement as supporting their positions.
Right. Well, you know, the president has at his side, as one of his key advisors, Steve Bannon, who has been a proponent of what's been called the alt-right, the alternative right, which includes a lot of white nationalist groups. You have to believe that the president sees these groups as part of his political base, and he does not want to alienate them, particularly at a time when it's clear that his base is shrinking, not expanding. This president got 46% of the vote in the election a year ago. You look at the national opinion polls, the favorable rating somewhere about 10% lower than the vote he got, 35, 36%. One poll, Quinnipiac, had him at 33%. So he's got to be thinking, I can't alienate my base. I'm losing a lot of people in other places, and more and more Republicans willing to criticize me. The last thing I need politically is to alienate some of my core supporters. I think that was part of his impulse as well.
Right. Now, it wasn't in response to what he said Saturday, but I think Friday he came out talking about his rhetoric with Korea, and he said tens of millions of people like what I'm saying. Are we talking about the same folks?
To some extent. I mean, there's no doubt that this president over and over and over again has decided to appeal to his core supporters and not try to expand very much beyond his base. Now, that has been successful for him. You know, he is president because he defied and ignored the advice and conventional wisdom of a lot of political experts. So he has a legitimate reason to think he knows best. But the fact is, running for president and being president are very, very different jobs. And he's learned in the healthcare debate, he's learned in several other areas that you cannot govern this country effectively simply by appealing to a narrow base of support. You can't do it. You perhaps can win elections that way, but you can't govern that way. And this is part of the extraordinarily difficult adjustment he's had to make as someone who has no experience in politics, no experience in governing. And he's finding that at one point he said, who knew that healthcare was such a complex issue? Well, who knew that the presidency was so difficult? He's learning that every single day.
30 seconds, Steve Roberts, ABC News political analyst. Steve Bannon, in or out?
Well, Bannon clearly was part of the influence. Bannon, a man who was been closely associated with what's been called the alt-right, the alternative right, that includes a lot of these white supremacist, white nationalist groups. He clearly still has influence. His hand was very clear in that statement. But I think General Kelly, the new chief of staff, is smart enough to understand that Bannon's influence is probably more negative than positive. Others have tried to push Bannon out. They haven't succeeded yet. Maybe Kelly will.
Very good. Steve Roberts, ABC News political analyst from Washington. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.